He was the first mutant antagonist created for the IDW universe, who quickly turned into a fan-favorite character. Over the years, he transitioned from the role of the antagonist to become a driving force of change in the IDW universe, sometimes through horrific actions, and at other times through incredible personal sacrifice. But what's the secret behind this character that immediately hooks the reader's attention whenever he steps into a panel? Join me today as I explore the original version of Old Hob from the IDW universe. Hob started his life as a pet for his human companion, a kid named Billy. This comfortable life would be cut short by Billy's mom, who, tired of Billy not cleaning after the cat, kicked Hob out of the house, forcing him to live on the streets, scavenging for food scraps, and sometimes fighting other animals to survive. One day, he stumbled upon an unusual dinner. 4 turtles walking on some green ooze. Hob took Raphael, unaware that the lab escapees had a rat protector in the form of Splinter. Trying to save Raph, Splinter started a fight with Hob, leaving him one-eyed. This happened in a very brief moment while the turtles and Splinter were trying to escape from both the Foot Clan and their captors from the lab. Splinter only had enough time to bring 3 turtles with him into the sewers, forcing Raph to survive on his own in the streets for a year. His encounter with Splinter initially felt deadly. Hob was ready to die there, but the mutagen he came into contact with turned him into a humanoid cat. Moments after his transformation, he heard Chet and Baxter discussing the rat, as he had a psychotropic serum in his blood that would be useful for creating other intelligent mutant animals. Now that he could understand human language, Hob offered his assistance in capturing Splinter. After all, he would never be able to forget the scent of the creature that took his eye. But Baxter had other plans for Hob. He took him to StockGen Labs to run various tests on him. Hob came to realize that they weren't checking his health, they were experimenting on him. Willing to keep the scientists' attention away from him, he convinced Baxter to let him go out to track Splinter. His timing was excellent as well. Chet had managed to draw a lot of blood from Hob and used it in other experiments, such as with Slash, the mutant snapping turtle. Being a creature of habit, Hob learned to live on the streets by stealing. Not because he wasn't given any money, but because he didn't want to depend on humans for survival. Not after what happened to him. Hob quickly realized that humans saw him as a monster, and using this fear, he recruited his own gang members to help him get revenge on Splinter. Hob's perspective changed when he finally crossed paths with Splinter and the Turtles. He realized they were a family, which made him hate Splinter even more. But this event clearly changed Hob's perspective. Having a mutant family was the ultimate act of independence from the humans who once abandoned him. Unfortunately, humans kept bailing on him, as his own gang members were too afraid of going against the Turtles again. Still, Hob had a job to do, and when he had Raphael surrounded, the rest of the Turtles showed up to save him, and the Turtles were finally reunited. An event that probably left Hob feeling even more jealous. Baxter gave Hob a last chance to redeem himself. He armed him with mousers that he used to kidnap Splinter from the Turtle Lair. But unfortunately for him, the Foot Clan then broke into StockGen Labs and took Splinter. Under the increasing pressure of General Krang, Baxter shot Hob and left him for dead on a rooftop. But Hob didn't die. He had kept a vial of ooze that saved his life. Having found out how Slash was also left for dead by the Turtles, Hob started planning his revenge. And for this plan, he was going to need a mutant army. Upon the quick conquest of the underworld by the Foot Clan, Hob made a deal with the clan to ensure they would never go after him. To do this, he offered to help the Turtles and Splinter find Leonardo, who was being brainwashed by the clan. He did this with the excuse of recruiting them for his army against humanity. But it became clear once he delivered them to the Shredder that he had different plans. Of course, the clan didn't know about Slash, so Hob sent the giant turtle to help our heroes escape. For Splinter, seeing his son turned against him was enough to force him into making a pact with Hob. Splinter would join his army in exchange for his weapons. But Splinter would need to do a little favor for him first. He would need to steal mutagen from StockGen, which Splinter successfully did, right before Slash blew up the entire facility. As promised, Hob helped Splinter and the Turtles retrieve Leo and escape the city. This was a considerable risk for Hob. After all, he had just made a deal with the Shredder to be left alone, but the prospect of having more mutant soldiers was a bigger incentive. But Hob wasn't a scientist. He tried using the mutagen to create soldiers, but all he came up with was Pigeon Pete, who was only skilled in playing checkers. Aware of his shortcomings, he kidnapped Lindsay Baker, the former director of mutagenic sciences at StockGen. While her recruitment wasn't exactly a great start, the only company she could work for was blown up by Slash and Hob. After finding out that Hob had kept some of Splinter's blood, Lindsay had hopes of finally completing her experiments. All the evidence she needed was provided by Slash, who took some of Splinter's blood and injected it into himself, making him much more intelligent. With Lindsay's help, they combined the mutagen with a psychotropic serum. As a result, they created Herman the Hermit Crab and Mondo Gecko. This was the beginning of his mighty Mutanimals, which only included animals turned mutants, or Lindsay. Splinter and the Turtles made an alliance with Hob to gain bigger numbers to go against the Foot Clan. However, Krang's menace was more urgent, and the Turtles had no choice but to fight alongside the clan instead. But there was a plan to pit the clan against Krang, and then the Turtles would fight against the winner. Splinter joined the Mutanimals on their attack on the clan headquarters in New York. Unfortunately, Hob was only in it to retrieve all the mutagen that the clan had in its possession. Once he got his paws on it, he left Splinter to fend for himself. Hob's priorities changed after Lindsay was kidnapped by her ex-girlfriend to work for Null Industries. The company, led by the extra-dimensional Madame Null, was doing research to combine different species into one. One of these mutants was the Mutagen Man. Hob interrogated a scientist who led them directly into a trap, but a much-needed step, as they were able to free two mutants from there who were about to be sold to the Foot Clan, Sally Pride and Man Ray. During this experience, clashes over Hob's morality began to concern Slash. The giant turtle was against the use of violence, something that Hob saw as a means to an end. He was of the mind that anyone who stood in his way should be killed. Hob confronted Null and warned her that as long as she continued hurting mutants, he would make sure her business couldn't prosper. And Hob's clashes with Slash weren't a real obstacle anymore. He had found very loyal soldiers in Herman and Ray, who would never question his plans. However, this meant that Hob had to conceal his more morally ambiguous plans from Slash, and it all came to a climax when Slash discovered that Hob had made a deal with Hun to sell the weapons they were seizing to fund their mutant army. Hob knew he had nothing to convince Slash. Both were victims of StockGen, yet Slash preferred a more pacifist approach. Turned off by Hob's actions, Slash decided to leave the city and the Mutanimals. Unfortunately, the Mutanimals were being watched by Darkwater and the EPF, and Slash was captured and turned into a mind-controlled zombie for Agent Bishop, the commander of the EPF. Hob's relationship with Hun would be short-lived, and his warehouse full of weapons would go down in flames after a clash with Leatherhead. When the EPF used Slash against the Mutanimals, Hob found a formidable nemesis in Bishop, another being who was able to sacrifice anything for his cause. Hob kidnapped Bishop's father and the wife of a Darkwater officer known as Wesley Knight in hopes of exchanging them for Slash, Lindsay, Seymour, Herman, and Ray, who were captured by the EPF. Darkwater backed off to get Wesley's wife back, but Bishop didn't. And to prevent this from happening again, he used Slash's body to stomp his own father to death. Hob began gathering Triceraton technology after their attempted invasion, and later, the Mutanimals had the opportunity to fight alongside them at Burno Island against the EPF. The Mutanimals participated with the hopes of freeing Slash. But unfortunately, it didn't take them long to find out that Slash had a failsafe in his body: a nuclear bomb. This was a clear indication that the EPF didn't go to Burno Island to invade, but to annihilate. Knowing that Slash was a ticking weapon of mass destruction, No one would take the risk of taking him anywhere near a population. It was then that Slash also started remembering all the violent things that Bishop had forced him to do. Seeing how much damage he'd done, he decided to die, far away from his friends. However, before leaving him behind, Slash told Hob that he was right. Humans needed to be stopped. Without Slash's pacifist mindset in his team, Hob was more motivated than ever to declare war on anyone who stood in his way, mutants and humans alike. This included Baxter, Null, and Bishop. Taking advantage of Raphael's recent trauma at the hands of Bishop, Hob recruited him for a mission to break into Null Industries to steal DNA sequencing data, something he justified by saying that Null wanted to make slaves and he wanted to make soldiers. But Hob wasn't telling the whole story. With the help of Ray, they created a mutagen bomb to produce new soldiers during Baxter's celebration party after he was elected mayor. To complicate things, Bishop and Hun were now commanding zombie Slash clones. His plan didn't go as planned. Baxter escaped before he could detonate the bomb, and the mist from the explosion expanded beyond that area, turning humans in several blocks into mutants. Hobbs' words implied that he wanted humans to know what it felt like to be in the skin of mutants. But this was unfair to the crowd, because no one knew mutants existed until that night. After the explosion, the Mutanimals picked up some of the involuntary soldiers from the crowd to keep them safe from the EPF. As horrible as this act was, it's not hard to see the connections between Slash being turned into a monster against his will and Hobbs' actions against the unsuspecting people of Manhattan. In the wake of this horrific event, Mayor Stockman erected a 50-foot-high wall quarantining the mutants from the rest of the island. No one was allowed to enter or leave, and the perimeter was patrolled by the EPF. Because the mutants were isolated, the city provided some aid to their community, or at least enough to keep them under control. Hob used his new soldiers as enforcers to keep Mutant Town under control, but the situation quickly got out of control as some of them started abusing their power. To make matters worse, Hob was surrounded by followers. The only person questioning his decisions was Sally, and after seeing him try to sell 3 infant mutant weasels as soldiers to the Foot Clan in exchange for goods, she decided to leave him. Hob had raised the weasels up to that point. The reason he needed to sell Mushroom, Xana, and Zinc was to get more resources for Mutant Town. The government was only giving them enough food and goods to keep them under control. Still, Hob knew that as long as they depended on Baxter, they would never have enough power to be self-sufficient. Without the weasels, Hob sold Toka and Razar to the Foot Clan. An operation that didn't go as expected raised concerns from Man Ray, who began to see Hob as a weak leader. Seeing how Hobbs' leadership portrayed mutants as terrorists, enforcing the idea of keeping them contained, she began organizing non-violent protests against Hob. Seeing how this could lead to their execution by an angry mob, Ray sent snipers to take Sally down. After seeing this at play, Hob confronted Ray and found out he was keeping the Weasels and Lita caged so that he could plan an attack against the Splinter Clan without killing the Weasels that Hob had learned to care so much about. This was when Hob revealed to Ray that even if they ended up dead, if Sally became the new voice of the mutants, it would lead to the success of Mutant Town as a legitimate community. The situation got out of control, and it ended with Hob, Ray, and Herman imprisoned by Sally. But the Weasels helped Hob escape, and once he went underground, he reunited with Lindsay, who was living in a secret lab. To Hob, the whole thing was a success. He had taught the mutants to resist authority, a skill that would be helpful in resisting humans in the future. With Mutant Town rising as a nation, Lindsay and Hob moved on to the next phase, which included populating an island where mutants could be free from contact with the humans. Lindsay was also working on a synthesized mutagen, which could allow them to mutate individual parts of the body, giving mutants special abilities. After convincing the Weasels to go with him, Hob and Lindsay went to North Brother Island, a small island located between the Bronx and Rikers Island. It used to be the site of the Riverside Hospital for Quarantinable Diseases, but it was now uninhabited and served as a bird sanctuary. Raphael followed them there with the help of Herman, and after seeing his plans, he determined that Hobb's intentions were good. He was still hoping for a mutant world, but he had learned his lesson about mutating humans without their consent. The next step was to blow up the wall. Hobb and Ray planted all the explosives, but the Weasels still considered Ray to be a villain. They attacked him and cut his throat. This caused the explosives to get triggered, and as a result, the wall came down earlier than planned. This was a victory for Hobb, who finally put an end to the confinement of Mutant Town, but it came at a huge personal loss: the apparent death of the Weasels and Man Ray. Don't worry, the Weasels survived and were rescued by a Lopex. By the end of the Armageddon game, Hobb helped the Turtles in their fight against Madame Null, but they received unexpected help from Null's minions, who assisted them in capturing their boss and putting her in the custody of the EPF. After this adventure, Herman and Hobb moved to Mutant Island and remained as allies of the Turtles. Unfortunately, the settlement in Mutant Island would prove to be difficult. Lindsay, who was still experimenting with her synthesized mutagen, ended up turning into a mutant Black Widow, needing blood all the time to think clearly. As a result, she killed the early mutant settlers and could only be defeated by Hobb and Wesley Knight. Lindsay was taken to the EPF, and with her, all the knowledge about mutagen. Fortunately for Hobb, the Mutanimals were back, and he reunited with a very much alive Ray, Mondo Gecko, Bitchin' Pete, and Seymour. And that's the story so far at the time of this recording. According to Tom Waltz, who was the initial writer of the series, former editor-in-chief Chris Ryall suggested him to add a mutant cat, so that the Turtles could have a mutant enemy. Waltz wasn't sure at first. He wasn't planning on putting a mutant in his first story. Still, Tom took on the challenge, and given the themes of fate and destiny he was exploring, he decided that if he had to use a cat, he would give him a devil name. He began researching old nicknames for the devil, eventually finding Old Scratch and Old Hobb. At the time, Tom was unaware that there was already a mutant cat named Scratch in the Turtleverse, so it was a good thing he chose Old Hobb. Since the beginning, fans thought Old Hobb was IDW's version of Scratch, but it was simply a coincidence. Once the character was created, it was up to the series' initial artist, Dan Duncan, to bring the character to the page. For inspiration, he remembered when he used to work in a complex that had a little society of alley cats. They nicknamed them the Garbage Cats, and they had greasy, matted fur that would stick to their bodies, and they'd slink around like they owned the place. It was their grungy confidence that Dan found cool, so he took that and added his interpretation of an early 1900s bare-knuckle boxer into the mix. The character continued to be influenced by past characters and concepts in the following years. The events of the Mutant Town saga brought Hobb onto a similar path as Caesar, a one-eyed mutant Wolverine from a scenario in the RPG TMNT and Other Strangeness, titled Caesar's Weasels. Caesar was created in a secret government lab in Canada and escaped with 3 weasels and a mutant bat. His past experience left him hating humans, which was yet another similarity with Hobb. He was also connected with 3 weasels, although the originals were teenagers, not infants. Since the Palladium characters and stories are not owned by Paramount, these similarities are more homages than adaptations. It is worth noting that despite Hobb being an original character, many of his contributions were largely inspired by the original Mighty Mutanimals lore from the Archie comics. The most recent influence is the IDW version of the Mutania Island. In 2016, IDW had an event titled Deviations, which was a sort of what-if series of specials. In the TMNT one, all 4 turtles were corrupted by the Shredder, rather than just Leonardo, during the events of City Fall. In this special story, Hobb would have been killed by Raphael, and his lifeless body would have been mourned by Slash. While this is an imaginary story, Hobb would have died trying to help Splinter save his sons, an interesting perspective on his character, and how he's always ready to die for a cause. Hobb was a victim of abandonment pain, who was later used as a lab specimen, only to be betrayed and abandoned by a human again. This succession of disappointments led him onto a path of terrorism and radical revolution that ended up influencing the events of the IDW universe. His acts of terror, while unjustifiable, were driven mainly by his views on mutant autonomy and survival. This makes Hob a revolutionary who doesn't care who he has to do business with or whose rights he has to violate, as long as he achieves his goal of saving mutant kind from the cruelty of humans. Hob's predisposition to risk his life for his cause also makes him extremely dangerous and unpredictable. Because of this, he has the potential to become a martyr for others, which is something that could easily end up happening in this universe. Old Hob's main appeal is his constant evolution. He initially disliked the Turtles and Splinter, but ultimately developed a more diplomatic relationship with them. This is also a fascinating look into the Turtles' minds, as they know Hob is a terrorist but are willing to let his crimes slide in favor of a greater good. This love-hate relationship readers can have with the character at any given time makes Old Hob one of the most three-dimensional characters of this universe. His moral ambiguity will always be the hook to any story he appears in, and this is why, I think, the character became a fan favorite. What are your thoughts on Old Hob's moral ambiguity? Do you also find yourself changing sides constantly as you read stories with him in them? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.